My name is Dara Okonkwo. I am 31 years old. And the day my family sold my bedroom furniture while I was at work was not the worst thing they ever did to me. It was just the last thing. I want to be precise about that distinction because I have spent a long time thinking about it. The worst thing happened years before, in a chain of smaller events so gradual I did not have language for them until I was old enough and far enough away to see the whole shape. What happened with the furniture was not the worst. It was just the thing that finally made the shape visible. I grew up in a house in the eastern suburbs, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quarter-acre, the kind of house that photographs well and means something in the family mythology. My grandmother bought it in 1978. My mother was raised there. I was raised there. 3 generations of Okonkwos in the same rooms, which sounds like something beautiful and mostly was not. My grandmother, Adiz, was a woman of tremendous practicality. She had emigrated from Nigeria in 1971 with $340 and a money belt and a degree in nursing that she had to recertify twice before any American hospital would honor it. By 1978, she had saved enough for the down payment on that house. She worked nights for 11 years. She raised my mother mostly alone after my grandfather passed in 1984. She was not a sentimental woman. She did not speak often about sacrifice or difficulty, but she was precise and careful, and she understood exactly what she had built and who it was built for. She built it for me, not exclusively, but in a specific and deliberate way that I did not fully understand until I was 24 years old, and her estate attorney, a quiet man named Gerald Osei, called me into his office at 2:30 p.m. on a Thursday in November and slid a document across the desk and told me to read the 3rd paragraph on page 2. My grandmother had left the house to me. Not to my mother, Celestine. Not to my uncle Kofi, her son, who had been living in the house rent-free since 2016. Not divided among the family. To me, specifically, with a letter of instruction attached that read, in her precise handwriting, Dara understands what a house is for. I did not understand at 24 what to do with that. I understood the legal fact of it. Gerald Osei walked me through the deed transfer with careful patience, and by December 14th of that year the house was in my name, registered at the county recorder's office, official. I paid the transfer taxes myself, $2,140. I have the receipt. But the human fact of it, what it meant to own the roof under which my mother and uncle still lived, what it would require of me to hold that correctly, that I did not understand yet. I made a decision that I now recognize as characteristic of who I was at 24. I said nothing about it. I filed the deed. I kept paying my own rent on the studio apartment I had moved into 2 years earlier. I did not tell my mother or uncle that the house was mine. I thought, with the particular naivety of someone who has not yet been tested, that I would find a gentle moment to explain, that there would be a right time, that the family would understand my grandmother's reasoning, and we would figure out something fair together. That was in December. I was still looking for the gentle moment 7 years later, when I came home from work on a Tuesday in October to find my bedroom completely empty. Before I tell you what happened after I opened that filing cabinet, tell me, where are you right now? Are you home? Are you somewhere that belongs to you, that no one can walk into and rearrange while you're gone? I ask because I know what it feels like to answer yes to that question and discover, at 31 years old, standing in a doorway with your work bag still on your shoulder, that the answer was more complicated than you thought. I should explain what I mean when I say I came home to find my bedroom empty. I had kept a room in my grandmother's house, my house, though I cannot yet say that cleanly because the studio apartment I rented was 22 minutes away and my work schedule sometimes required early mornings, and because my mother had asked me to keep the room, and because I was still, at 31, trying to be the kind of daughter who showed up when asked. I kept clothes there. My grandmother's writing desk, which she had left specifically to me in a separate clause of the will, sat in the corner under the window. I had a bookshelf. A lamp I had bought myself at 19. A quilt my grandmother had made. On October 14th, a Tuesday, I left for work at 6:52 a.m. I returned at 6:09 p.m. The room was bare. The desk was gone. The bookshelf was gone. The lamp, the quilt, the 2 small framed photographs I had hung on the wall the year my grandmother died. All of it gone. The carpet had vacuum marks in it, fresh, as though someone had cleaned up afterward. My mother was in the kitchen. My Uncle Kofi was on the back porch with a beer. I stood in the doorway of the empty room for what felt like a long time before I walked back down the hall. I said, "Where is everything from my room?" My mother looked up from a counter. She had a particular expression she used when she had decided something was reasonable, a slight lifting of her chin, a stillness in her eyes. She said, "We needed the space. You weren't using it anyway." I said, "Where is grandmother's desk?" She said the desk had gone with the rest of it. She said Kofi knew a man who bought furniture, and they had gotten $340 for everything, which she said as though the number were evidence that the transaction had been fair. Kofi appeared in the kitchen doorway behind her. He was 4 years older than my mother, which made him 61, and he had the particular bearing of a man who has spent decades being accommodated by people who love him without question. He shrugged. He said, "I should be grateful. They let me keep the room as long as they had." He said the house was getting crowded and something had to give. I looked at him for a moment. Then I walked to the filing cabinet in the hallway, a 2-drawer metal cabinet my grandmother had kept in that exact spot for 20 years, and I opened the top drawer, and I found the folder I had put there 3 years earlier, the one with the county recorder's stamp on the front, the one with my name at the top of the first page. I did not open it. I did not need to. I already knew what it said. I took my work bag and my keys and I drove home. I need to tell you how I came to own that house and what the 7 years between the deed transfer and the Tuesday with the empty bedroom looked like, because without that, the story does not make sense. After Gerald Osei transferred the deed in December of my 24th year, I went home and I sat with the fact of it for a long time. My grandmother had been methodical. The will was airtight. Gerald told me that clearly. There had been a brief period, in the 2 weeks after the reading, when my mother had retained her own attorney, a man named Barry Fichter, to explore whether the bequest could be contested. Gerald called me on November 29th at 4:17 p.m. to tell me about this. He said the grounds were thin, and he did not expect it to go anywhere. He was right. By mid-December, Celestine had dropped the contest and called me 3 times in 4 days, her voice softer than I had heard it in years, asking if we could talk, if we could work something out, if I understood that she had grown up in that house and she did not want to lose it. I told her she was not going to lose it. I told her I was not going to do anything precipitous. I told her I needed time to think. What I did not tell her, because I was 24 and did not yet understand leverage or what happens when you decline to use it, was that I had consulted Gerald about her options and mine, and that the picture was clear. The house was mine. The occupants had no lease and had made no financial contributions to the property in the relevant period. If I chose to exercise my legal rights, they could be asked to leave with 30 days' notice. I did not exercise those rights. I made a different decision. I told my mother that she and Kofi could stay in the house, that I would not change the arrangement, that I asked only 2 things, that they maintain the property reasonably, and that they let me keep my room. She agreed immediately, warmly. She called me thoughtful and said my grandmother would have been proud. That lasted approximately 11 months. In November of the following year, I was 25, and it was a Sunday. I came to the house to find that Kofi had converted my room's closet into a storage space for his contracting equipment without asking. Extension cords, pipe fittings, a portable generator. He had moved my winter clothes into a bin in the garage. When I brought it up, my mother said he needed the space and it was just a closet. I said nothing. I moved the clothes back. I sent my mother a text that evening at 8:34 p.m. asking her to ensure my belongings were not moved without my knowledge. She replied, "Okay, Dara. No need to be dramatic." The pattern that followed is one I recognize now as entirely predictable and was entirely invisible to me at the time. Small encroachments, each one deniable. My shelf in the kitchen refrigerator claimed by Kofi's meal prep containers. The corner of the driveway I used to park and blocked, repeatedly, by a truck belonging to one of his workers. A key to my filing cabinet gone missing in the summer of my 26th year. I replaced the lock myself at a hardware store for $34, and the replacement lock scratched around the keyhole the following spring, as though someone had tried it with the wrong key. My mother during this period was intermittently warm and intermittently impossible to reach. She would call me on Sunday mornings and talk for 40 minutes about her church choir and her garden and the neighbors, and then would not answer my calls for 2 weeks. She told me regularly that I was the best thing she had ever done, and she told me, twice, in arguments I no longer remember the origin of, that I had always been difficult and that my grandmother had spoiled me into expecting too much. I was making $41,200 a year at that point, working as a records coordinator at a municipal services office. I had no savings to speak of. I had student loan payments of $387 per month. I ate lunch at my desk most days. My house, had a property tax bill of $4,870 per year that I was paying in full every December because my mother had told me in year 2 that she and Kofi simply could not manage it. I paid it without a formal agreement that they would reimburse me because I did not want to make things worse. In my 28th year, I was promoted to senior records coordinator. My salary went to $53,600. That same autumn, Kofi began hosting what he called family dinners at the house on Friday nights, gatherings of 8 to 12 people, relatives I had met 2 or 3 times in my life, cousins and in-laws who filled the living room and the kitchen and the driveway, and who treated the house with the comfortable familiarity of people who had been told, or had assumed, that it was theirs. I went to the first 2. At the second one, in September of my 28th year, Kofi introduced me to a man named Richard, a cousin's husband, as the girl who lives in Adi's old house. Not my house. The girl who lives there. I smiled. I drove home at 10:47 p.m. and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for 11 minutes before I went inside. I did not go to the third dinner or any after it. When my mother asked why, I told her I was tired on Fridays. She accepted this for about 4 months, and then she did not. There was a specific conversation in February of my 29th year that I returned to often. My mother called at 8:11 p.m. on a Thursday and told me the back gutter had pulled away from the fascia and she had gotten a quote of $780 to have it reattached.
She said she would split it with me.
I said I would pay it myself and have my own contractor look at it first. She said there was no need. The man she had found was reliable. Kofi knew him. I said I preferred to get my own quote. She was quiet for a moment and then said, carefully, "Sometimes I think you don't trust us, Dara." I said I trusted her. I said I just wanted to manage the property maintenance myself. She said, "It's not like you're ever here." I had that sentence in my head for 3 days afterward. It's not like you're ever here. The implication that presence was the criterion for ownership. That because I had chosen not to sleep in a house where my belongings were moved without notice and my uncle treated every room as an extension of his workspace, I had forfeited some claim that was more important than the one recorded at the county recorder's office. I paid the gutter repair myself. $640, my contractor charged less. I sent my mother a text when it was done. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. In June of that same year, Kofi began parking a second vehicle, a work van with his contracting company's name on the side, in the driveway permanently. Not occasionally. Permanently, so that when I came to the house there was no room for my car, and I was parking on the street. When I mentioned it to my mother at 7:30 p.m. on a Sunday in July, she said Kofi needed it there for early morning jobs, and it wasn't really a problem since I didn't come that often anyway. I said, "It is a problem because it's my driveway." She looked at me with that particular stillness and said, "I don't know why everything always has to be a negotiation with you." I drove back to my apartment that night at 9:03 p.m. and sat at my kitchen table and looked at nothing in particular for a while. I was 29 years old. I owned a 4-bedroom house. I was parking on the street outside it. In January of my 30th year, my mother called me at 7:22 p.m. and told me that she thought I should sign the house over to her. I want to write that sentence again because I want you to understand how it was said. Not as a request. Not with preamble. She called, she asked how work was, and then she said, "Dara, I think it's time you sign the house over to me. It was your grandmother's intention for this to stay in the family, and I think having it in your name creates complications." I said, "What complications?" She said that Kofi had a business opportunity that required him to show assets and that the house would be useful for that, and that it made more sense for it to be in her name since she lived there. I said I would think about it. She called back at 9:11 p.m. the same night. She said she had been talking to Kofi, and they both felt this was the right thing. She said my grandmother had not been thinking clearly in her last years. I want you to hold that sentence because I am still holding it, and that the house was always meant to be shared equally among the family, not given to one person. I said, Grandmother was thinking clearly. Gerald Osei has the documentation. There was a silence. Then my mother said, I don't know why you always have to be like this. I said I would talk to her soon, and I hung up. Something inside me finally hardened instead of bending. That is the only way I can describe it. I had been bending toward my mother and her brother for 7 years, bending around the encroachments, the presumptions, the gradual colonization of every space I had tried to maintain, and something in that phone call, in the specific revisionism of your grandmother was not thinking clearly, reached the place where bending was no longer possible. Not anger. Not yet. Something cooler than anger and more durable. I drove to the house the following Saturday at 10:30 a.m. Not to confront anyone. I told my mother I was picking up some things, which was true. I went to my room, which still had my furniture at that point, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a while and looked at my grandmother's writing desk in the corner and thought about what she had written on that letter. Dara understands what a house is for. I understood sitting there what I had been doing for 7 years. I had been treating the house as a relationship problem when it was a property law problem. Those are not the same kind of problem, and they do not have the same kind of solution. I called Gerald Osei from the driveway at 11:47 a.m. He answered on the third ring. I told him I wanted to discuss my options. He said he could meet me the following Thursday at 2 p.m. Gerald had not changed much since the estate settlement. He had the same wire-rimmed glasses, the same careful way of opening a folder like it contained something that required handling. He told me, at that Thursday meeting, several things I had not known. He told me that because the occupants of the house had never had a formal lease or a rental agreement, they were classified legally as tenants at will, meaning I could terminate their occupancy with 30 days written notice. He told me that I had been paying the property taxes for 6 consecutive years, which created a documented record of my ownership and financial responsibility. He told me that the furniture and personal property my grandmother had left me, including the writing desk, were mine under the estate documents regardless of where they were physically located, and that removing them without my consent could constitute conversion of property. I asked him if he meant the desk could be recovered. He said, if you can document its provenance and identify where it went, yes. I told him about the furniture sale. He wrote something down. He told me to find out the name of the buyer if I could. I went home, and I called my mother at 6:45 p.m. and told her I needed the name of the man who had bought the furniture. She said she didn't remember. I said the desk had been left to me specifically in the will, and I needed to recover it. She said it was just a piece of furniture, and I was being sentimental. I said I would need the name. She called back at 8:20 p.m. with a name, Marcus Webb, a second-hand dealer on Prescott Avenue. I wrote it down. I called Marcus Webb the following morning at 9:03 a.m. He was a careful man, professional, and when I explained that one of the items purchased, a writing desk, dark walnut, brass hardware, small brass plate on the left drawer with the initials AO, had been bequeathed to me in a will and removed from my property without my consent, he was quiet for a moment and then said he still had it. He had not yet sold it. He asked me to email him the estate document identifying the desk. I sent it from my phone at 9:31 a.m. He returned the desk to me on October 22nd, 8 days after the Tuesday, with the empty room. He delivered it himself, in a van, to my apartment. He charged me nothing for the return. He said before he left, I always ask if people have authority to sell. She said it was her house. I thanked him. I closed the door. I stood in my small apartment and looked at my grandmother's desk against the wall where I had put it, the brass plate with her initials catching the afternoon light, and I thought about that phrase. Her house. Gerald Osei sent the formal notice of eviction by certified mail on October 23rd, a Tuesday, exactly 9 days after I had come home to the empty room. The notice gave 30 days. It cited the property deed, the tax records, and the 6-year history of sole financial responsibility. It was 4 pages, precise and unambiguous, and it arrived at the house on October 25th at 8:47 a.m., signed for by Kofi. My mother called me at 9:14 a.m. I did not answer. She called 11 more times before noon. I will tell you what the calls were like because I think it matters that you know. The first few were short, clipped voicemails that just said my name and asked me to call back, in a voice I recognized as the one she used when she was controlling something. By the 4th call, around 10:30 a.m., the voice had changed. She said she did not understand what had happened, that someone must have made a mistake, that surely we could talk about this like family. By the 7th call, at 11:47 a.m., she said, "Dara, I know we've had our differences, but I need you. We need you. This is your home too. I want you to hold that sentence next to the one from January. I think it's time you sign the house over to me. Hold them side by side." The distance between those 2 sentences is the distance between what she believed the situation was and what it actually was, and she had 7 years to understand that distance, and chose not to. Kofi called once, at 1:22 p.m. He said, "This is not who we are as a family." I thought about the Friday night dinners where I was introduced as the girl who lives in Adi's old house. I thought about the text message he had sent me in my 27th year. "The house bills are your responsibility, since it's your name on it." He had known exactly whose name was on it when the bills arrived. He had found the arrangement convenient then. I did not call him back. My mother left a voicemail at 2:08 p.m. that I did not listen to until that evening. She said, "Dara, I raised you in that house. I changed your diapers in that house. Your grandmother would be ashamed of what you're doing." I sat with the mention of my grandmother for a long time. My grandmother, who had written in her own precise handwriting, "Dara understands what a house is for." My grandmother, who had watched her daughter for 60 years and made a deliberate, documented, legally airtight decision about who to trust with the thing she had worked 11 years of night shifts to build. I did not think my grandmother would be ashamed. I thought my grandmother had anticipated this exact conversation and had answered it 7 years in advance. Gerald Osei called me at 3:15 p.m. to confirm that delivery had been signed for and to ask how I wanted to proceed. I told him I wanted to proceed with a 30-day timeline. He said he would monitor for any response from their end and advise me if legal counsel appeared. He said he would check in again on November 5th. I thanked him and I drove home, and I made dinner, and I did not check my phone again until the following morning, by which point my mother had called for more times. By November, my mother had retained Barry Fichter again, the same attorney who had tried to contest the will 7 years earlier. Gerald told me this on November 3rd at 4:40 p.m. He said that Fichter had sent a letter disputing the eviction on the grounds that my mother had a reasonable expectation of continued occupancy based on my long-standing permission for her to live there. Gerald said this was a legitimate argument in some jurisdictions, and we would need to address it carefully. I sat with that for a day. Then I sent Gerald an email listing from memory every property tax payment I had made, 6 payments, for $1,870 each, totaling $29,220, with the corresponding bank records I had kept. I also sent him the text message exchange from my 25th year, the one where my mother had called me dramatic for asking that my belongings not be moved. And I sent him a screenshot of a text Kofi had sent me in my 27th year that said, verbatim, "The house bills are your responsibility, since it's your name on it." Gerald replied at 8:53 p.m., "This is very helpful. I'll respond to Fichter tomorrow." The formal response went out on November 6th. Fichter did not file a countermotion. On November 19th, Gerald called me at 5:22 p.m. to tell me that my mother and Kofi had agreed to vacate by November 28th, 2 days before the 30-day deadline. He said this in the same even tone he used for everything, and I sat on my apartment floor after we hung up and looked at the wall for a while. Not because I was sad exactly. Because 7 years is a long time to hold something at arm's length, and now it was over, and the ending was quieter than I had expected. My mother did not call me again after November 3rd, Brianna, my cousin, Kofi's daughter, who had been texting me intermittently since the eviction notice, sent me a message on November 20th that said, "I know this isn't easy. I'm sorry it got here." I replied, "Thank you. Me too." I meant both sentences. It had not been easy. I was also sorry it had arrived at a 30-day notice after 7 years of trying to find another way. But I understood by then that the other way I had been looking for did not exist. You cannot find a gentle solution to a problem that the other party does not acknowledge as a problem. You can only wait until they remove your furniture and sell your grandmother's desk for $340 and then stop waiting. I have thought a great deal about the $340, about the specific arithmetic of it. My grandmother's writing desk, the one she used for 40 years, the one with her initials on the brass plate, sold for less than 1 month's property tax payment on the house she had left to me. I do not think my mother and uncle saw the irony of that number. I think they saw furniture that was in the way of space they believed was theirs. The gap between those two ways of seeing a room is, I think, the entire story. I went to the house on November 30th, the day after they left. I will not describe what I found in detail because some of it was unpleasant in the ways these things can be. Furniture moved, scuff marks on the baseboards in the hallway, a kitchen that needed more than a surface wipe, a garage that had been used as a staging area for Kofi's contracting work and left with oil stains on the concrete that took 2 weekends to treat. These are the practical things. I cleaned them. I hired help for what I could not manage alone. The cleaning service I had scheduled for December 2nd arrived at 8:30 a.m. and worked until 4:15 p.m. and charged me $380, which I paid without complaint. What I will describe is standing in my grandmother's kitchen at 11:15 a.m. on that November morning, after the cleaning crew had gone and the windows were open and the cold November air was moving through the rooms, looking out at the backyard she had planted and kept for 40 years. The rosebush she had put in the south corner, the stone border along the fence line she had laid herself one summer in the 90s, the particular way the light came through the oak tree in the back corner at that hour and fell in long strips across the grass. I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not triumph, not relief, exactly. Something quieter. The specific feeling of a thing being over that was supposed to be over years ago, not joyful but correct. The way a door finally closes flush after you have adjusted the frame, and it fits the way it was always supposed to fit. I thought about my grandmother standing in this same kitchen, in the early mornings before her night shifts, 40-some years ago. I thought about what she had understood about this family and about me that I had spent 7 years trying not to accept. She had seen the shape of things clearly enough to put it in writing. She had been patient enough to do it legally, properly, with a deed and an attorney and a letter of instruction. She had just trusted me to eventually do the same. Some things are worth protecting slowly. The cost of patience is not always waste. I took out my phone and called a locksmith. I scheduled a cleaning service for December 2nd. I stood at the kitchen window for a few more minutes, watching the last of the autumn leaves move in the yard, and then I went through the house room by room, opening windows, letting the cold air come through. I have lived in the house since January of the following year. I rent the second bedroom to a woman named Tanya, who is a nurse and keeps remarkable hours and leaves the kitchen cleaner than she finds it. The property taxes are paid each December. The writing desk is in the room that was my grandmother's, under the window where she kept it, the brass plate with her initials catching the morning light. There is something I want to share about property ownership that I did not know at 24 and that I think more people should know. If you own property and have given long-term permission for family members to live there without a formal lease, they may acquire certain legal protections as tenants at will, but those protections are not permanent and they do not override the deed. A real estate attorney in your area can walk you through the specific rules in your jurisdiction, and in most cases a formal written license agreement, which documents the permissive nature of the occupancy, can protect you from the kind of prolonged legal uncertainty I experienced. Gerald Osei charged me $2,800 for the full eviction process. It was the most useful $2,800 I have ever spent. If you were in Dara's position, if you had held that deed for 7 years without enforcing it, watching your family treat your grandmother's house as their own, would you have sent the eviction notice the week after the furniture was sold, the way she did? Or would you have gone back inside, sat down with your mother and uncle, and given them one more chance to understand what they had taken?